Let's pray together. Father in heaven, we thank you for the gift of marriage. We thank you for the gift of children. We thank you for the gift of love and of salvation. Mm-hmm. Help us to better understand how to love our spouse, how to love our kids, and how to be loved by you is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I forgot the quiz. Let's run over these questions. Marriage difficulties can be divided into 3 categories, blank, blank, and blank. No prize for this one, sorry. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a hint. Conflict. That's right. That's right.
Conflict, cycles, and cruelty.
The first 2 categories need a workroom approach. The third needs a what? Courtroom approach. Very good. Ask not whose fault is this problem, but what? How do we resolve? How can we work together? Yes. I'm sorry. I gave 3 options. How much leverage can I get from shaming my spouse? What does my mother say about my spouse? And how can we solve this problem together? Okay. To diffuse cycles, we must go leftist, MAGA, or vertical. Depending on who you ask, vertical, okay? We should be quick to hear, slow to speak. If we do this, we will be slow to
wrath.
Okay, very good. EAR stands for...
Oh, very good.
Very good.
Empathy equals ask and reflect.
Very good. All right, now we're going to talk about the 6 little foxes, how to rout out and replace relationship habits that eat away at love. The lesson is, and you'll find this to be true, I have found it to be true, that little things can kill, little habits that we have can seed themselves into the fabric of our relationship and wreak all kinds of havoc. Or, on the other hand, little positive practices and skills can really have a profound effect. So little things matter. I live in Florida, and in Florida, guess what the most dangerous animal is? What is the animal that's most likely to cause pain? Okay? What is the animal that's what do you think of when you think of Florida? Are there any what? Guess what? There are really no alligators in terms of day-to-day interactions with animals. What animal causes the most pain? No. I can't believe you don't know. I'll give you a hint that you're supposed to garden in bare feet. You do not in Florida. Fire ants, exactly. So little things, they don't kill you, but they are extremely painful. And it never fails when I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this one time. I'm going to go pick something out of the garden in my sandals. There's a pile of fire ants, and they get me. It's just crazy. So little things really have an impact. This is from Song of Solomon. Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. So I believe that this is alluding to the little things in relationships that wreak havoc. This presentation, by the way, was so impacting that an author named Gary Thomas, do you guys know Gary Thomas, The Sacred Marriage? He wrote The Sacred Search. He's an evangelical author. He lives pretty close to David, actually, in Colorado. He's fairly well known in evangelical circles. Took this chapter and basically did a video on it. He was so impacted by it. And he wrote an endorsement for our book, by the way, which was really cool. So what I'm going to be doing is sharing these habits with you and then sharing replacement behaviors for them. We have an expression in behavioral science that says negative reinforcement stops behavior, but positive reinforcement encourages behavior. If we don't have a replacement behavior, you're going to default back to the negative behavior, even if you try to stop it for a period of time. I'm sure all of you have experienced in your Christian walk fighting the bad fight of sin instead of fighting the good fight of faith. You know what I'm talking about. So fighting sin in our own strength is doomed to fail. In the same way, and sort of according to the same principle, if we're constantly just pointing out what's wrong, we're going to default to that. You can sort of see this in infants. If you say to an infant, don't do this, they will do the very thing you say don't do because their brain is not mature enough to process that word don't. And the power of suggestion will impel them toward the very thing you're trying to prevent. And that to some degree happens with adults, although with a little bit more inhibition and so forth. But if I said to you, for example, don't think about a pink elephant, what are you thinking about? a pink elephant. If I say don't think about a pink elephant, think about a green giraffe. What are you thinking about now? Don't say a pink elephant, a green giraffe. Just say a green giraffe. That's the point. So you want to have a replacement behavior. But let me say this to you. As we go through these negative habits that impact our marriages, let's remember that we want to have more self-reflection and less blame. In other words, I'm not sharing these things with you so that you can use them to clobber your spouse or point out the problem to your spouse. I'm mostly sharing them with you so that you can deal with them on your own, in your own life. So more self-reflection, less blame, have a workroom mindset, and remember that good habits are what? Caught rather than taught. So if you're really frustrated because your spouse is so critical and you want that to change about your spouse, and that's legitimate, model the non-critical approach to your spouse, and maybe they'll learn from you directly through observing you. Okay, so here are the 6 little foxes. Criticism, escalation, invalidation, defensiveness, withdrawal, and misinterpretation. Let's take criticism first. What are you doing? Have you heard these? You're like, oh, you're having a moment over there. All right, let's talk about criticism first. So a young man came home from church one day, and he said to his father, Dad, the hymns at church are terrible. The lyrics are insipid. The melodies are uninspiring. And the father said to him, go write your own hymn, son. And he did write his own hymn and many more. His name was Isaac Watts. He wrote Joy to the World, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, and many other hymns. So my point is just this, that criticism can be a good thing. God gave us reasoning faculties and critical reasoning faculties to solve problems. This is a positive trait in human nature, but it needs to be carefully directed because human beings by nature are negaholic. We recall bad experiences more easily. We recall insults more than praise. We tend to react more intensely to negative motivations. We think negative thoughts more frequently. We perceive negative information as more truthful. There's been research on juries where these juries were given false information about a defendant. They followed up by correcting the false information, and the false information, even after the correction, still had an impact on the defendant, on the jury's opinion of the defendant. Gossip is powerful. I don't know if you've ever had slander circulating about you, but it's extremely painful because it can have a permanent impact. So human beings are by nature very fond of negative information in a strange and twisted way. We're more impacted by negative first impressions. My dad used to train the kids in our family how to shake a hand. He would literally line all 4 kids up, say, put out your right hand, grab their hand, look them right in the eye and squeeze and say, nice to meet you, sir. You know, he would train us to do it because he knew we were going to have one chance at a what? A first impression. And so it's good to remember that, but it's sad at the same time that people are so impacted by negative first impressions because sometimes they're not accurate. Criticism in marriage is linked to depression in the criticized spouse. That's not surprising. This is a little bit surprising. Wives overall tend to be more critical than husbands. There's a very interesting sort of road test for the way that the male versus female reacts in a married situation. And we see it in gay and lesbian marriages. Women file for divorce 70% of the time. Men file for divorce only 30% of the time in heterosexual marriages. The divorce rate for lesbian couples is off the charts. The divorce rate for gay male couples is very low. It's lower than heterosexual couples. I don't remember exactly what it is. But a lot of the reason for that, by the way, is because they have open marriages where they can go out on their spouse and they don't really mind. Men are different than women. What I'm saying here is that women tend to have a higher level of sort of sensitivity to the quality of the relationship. And so because of that, they tend overall to be more critical of their spouses, which comes from a good place. Women are kind of the gatekeepers of the relationship quality in a sense, but at the same time, that needs to be controlled so that it doesn't end up having the opposite effect. Zero criticism in a marriage, a relationship as close as a marriage, is unrealistic. How can you possibly never have negative feedback for someone that you're sharing such a small space with? You share everything from toilets to children to bank accounts. You're going to have some feedback occasionally, so don't think there's going to be zero. But on the other hand, avoid criticism overwhelm, which is what tends to happen with couples. They tend to get overwhelmed. The negative feedback going back and forth tends to become just more than can be managed. And the replacement behavior for criticism is what? Affirmation. Now, I have this statistic up here. This is the agreed upon statistic among a number of experts that have studied relationship dynamics. It's very often that Gottman, the marriage expert, is well-known Jewish man that teaches on marriage, he and his wife, and he talks about this 5-to-1 ratio of affirmation to criticism. But what I've learned recently is that the 5-to-1 is for the number of affirmations to criticisms in a conflict situation. He says that the actual ratio of affirmation to criticism needs to be a lot higher than 5-to-1 in the run-of-the-mill interactions in marriage. So he's saying pretty much basically just affirm each other continually, and then once in a blue moon issue a criticism. He said, I read this I watched this video recently where he said, this marriage expert, John Gottman, who by observing couples can guess with 85% accuracy if they'll still be married in 5 years. He's amazing scientist. And he said there is no such thing as constructive criticism. He says, instead of issuing criticism, you want to say what you need to your spouse. Give an I message instead of a you message. You kind of saw that playing out here, where there was a tendency to maybe point out the wrong in the other person instead of saying, this is what I need. That can be very difficult, particularly for men. But saying, I need this, is going to go a lot further in that relationship and really doesn't come across as a criticism at all, although you are asking for change. So just for starters, though, having boiled all that down, just for starters, try every time you issue any kind of criticism, even if it's, your shoes are in the way, even if it's, have you taken out the garbage, or even if it's like, please don't talk so loud on the phone, or whatever you're doing. The little things can be negative feedback and experienced as criticism. For every time you do that, say at least 5 really glowing, nice things to your spouse. And you know what? Even as I'm saying this, I'm feeling personally convicted because I am very critical by nature. I think a lot and I have a critical mind, and which can be a good thing in a lot of ways. But if I'm not careful with my spouse, it will always be negative feedback. And so I have to learn every day how to do this. I will say this, that throughout the arc of our marriage, I have gotten much better. Both of us have gotten much better. There was a time in our marriage where I knew nothing about any of this stuff, and I had no sort of gatekeeping going on my criticisms of him, and it must have been awful. I feel bad. He's more laid back and sort of checked out, actually, and he was probably partly checked out because I was so critical. But I'm learning a better way. At the same time, I have to reset from time to time and decide to do it all over again. I love this verse from Paul because he models in the verse exactly what he's telling them to do. I don't know if you can catch this, but this is what he's doing. Therefore, comfort each other and edify. What does edify mean, David?
Build up.
Build up, like edifice, a building. Okay, comfort each other and edify. Build each other up. Edify one another. And then he says, just as you also are doing. So he's building them up while he tells them to build each other up. Isn't that beautiful? So he's modeling edification even as he's admonishing them to edify. So this is what the Lord wants for all of us, is to encourage one another. I'll tell you, David is a master of edification. He has, why are you like that, David? You're so encouraging to people. You say such nice things to people. How did you end up with that trait?
Jennifer, you're doing such a great job.
But how did you? No, but tell me. I want more information than that.
Like, it's an excellent observation, Jennifer.
Yeah. How did you end up that way? Was your dad
I have no idea. What?
Is your dad that way?
No, not particularly. I mean, he's not a negaholic, as you say.
Yeah.
But I don't know. You know what I think it is, actually? I really like people.
Yeah.
And when you like people, it's easy to see good things. Mm-hmm. And then you tell them that you see good things.
Yeah.
And it's also a habit. If you practice the habit of looking for opportunities to affirm people, it will come more and more natural.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is you've developed the habit of it.
Right.
And I remember a conversation we had 20 years ago when we were first kind of forming a friendship. And you and I talked about flattery versus edifying people and complimenting people. And you were kind of like, people rebuke me for flattery, but I'm not flattering people.
Right.
I'm just encouraging them. And I remember agreeing with you.
Yeah, because in The Desire of Ages, Ellen White says that Jesus never spoke a word of flattery. And I remember the first time I read that, I was puzzled. So I looked up the word flattery so I would have a sense. And it was basically saying something nice to someone that you don't actually believe is true so that you can exact some kind of an advantage or leverage. Well, that's very different than saying something that you genuinely like about the person.
Right.
So that's not flattery. It's just being nice and affirming, because God is the great affirmer, right? He sees in us the best version of ourselves. And so if we practice what one of Paul's favorite words is the word to edify, to build up. And we need to be building other people up.
And I think we can be so afraid of flattering people or of giving them an easy time. We feel that criticizing them will motivate them to better ends, but it really doesn't work that way. Because of the pressure it puts on the nervous system, the power struggles it creates, the shame wound it creates that then has to be corrected before the person can make any choices. So it ends up backfiring. And I think there's so much power in edifying people and encouraging them. And if you have to err on the side of flattery, then or complimenting people, you look good in that color, or I like your tie. If you can't think of anything else, say something like that, because to me...
Well, I saw Shawnee today, and the first thing I say, what did I say to you, Shawnee? Something about my hair. I said, I love your hair. Look at her hair, it's amazing. She also has a very girlish smile.
She does. She's a sweetheart. All right, so you guys get the point. What's the replacement for criticism? What is it?
Affirmation.
That's right. All right, let's talk about escalation. This is another one of the little foxes, the things that happen in married relationships in particular, but all relationships that wound the relationship. Story is told of a little girl that comes to her father and says, Dad, I am doing my English homework and I need to understand the definition of the word exasperate. And the father said, let me demonstrate exasperation. And he called a random number on his cell phone, and the man picked up, and the father said, is Melvin there? And the guy said, there's no one here by that name. Father said, okay, hung up, called the same number back, is Melvin there? The man said, you just called. There's no one here by that name. Okay, said the father, and they hung up. The father said to the little girl, I'm going to demonstrate anger, so that you can distinguish anger from exasperation. He called the same number back and said, is Melvin there? And the man said, I've had it with you. You've called me 2 times. This is the 3rd time. There is no one by the name of Melvin here. Stop calling me. The father, they hung up. Father turned to the daughter and said, that was anger. Now let me demonstrate exasperation. Called the same number back and said, this is Melvin. Have there been any calls from me? I'm glad you guys like my joke. Okay. I like the affirmation of the joke. So, little Johnny had a temper problem. He would blow up. His father gave him a remedy for it. He was to drive a nail in the fence every time he felt angry. Well, eventually Johnny got over his anger problem and stopped blowing up with people. But his father took him out to the fence and said, Johnny, look at the fence. It will never be the same. And it's true that when we are angry, when we blow up, how many of you have experienced this? You say things you wish you hadn't said later. You say things that are distorted, that are extreme, that are effectively not true, and are hurtful and wounding to the person that you're angry at, beyond what you really would have wanted. That's the damage to the fence. So, of course, we don't want to do this. Therapists used to prescribe to their clients what they called the Vesuvius hour, because it was thought that anger was simply an emotion that needed to be discharged, and once it was discharged, it was gone. But that didn't turn out to be true. In the process of discharging anger, what that individual is often doing is reinforcing the neural pathways of anger so that you may discharge that anger in the moment, but you reinforce the neural pathways and end up with unresolved anger happening again at some point in the future. So the Vesuvius Hour idea was that families would come together and just yell at each other and throw things and, get the anger out of their system. Didn't turn out to be very effective. So hostility predicts high cholesterol, high blood pressure, coronary heart disease, or a whole slew of health problems that come with hostility, higher hostility levels. A little bit of nuance here. Constructive anger may actually prevent heart disease. There is a destructive anger. So there's an appropriate kind of anger and then obviously a hurtful kind of anger. And this is what we see in Ephesians 4:26. Be angry, but do not sin. God gave us that anger for a reason. It has its place. But very often it is tinged with human sinfulness and it causes problems in marriage, particularly if you have a temper issue. Now, I'm just going to come clean here. I come from a family, good family, decent people, but my dad had a terrible temper. My dad was a real laid-back man, pretty passive most of the time, pretty pleasant to be around, but he didn't have control of his temper, and he would let things build. He didn't have very good emotional regulation or management. He'd let things build, and he'd blow sky high. There was a time, he wasn't abusive per se, but he would get pretty angry. My youngest brother, full-grown teenage boy, would kind of poke the bear with my dad and play with him kind of because he knew he could provoke him to anger. So this one particular time, he got him all riled up, and my younger brother, who's like 6 foot and big kid, runs out the door but slams the screen door behind him, and my dad pushed the entire door off the hinges in pursuit of my brother. So it just gives you an idea of the anger level of my dad at times. So I had that in my genetics. I'm, of the 4 kids in my family, the most like my father, the most driven like my father, but also, kind of hot-tempered like my father. And then I saw it modeled in his life throughout my childhood. And so I came into adult life, and I'm not into blowing up at any and everyone, but in a marriage situation, you're in like a pressure cooker. And so a few times I would blow up to my husband. And then I had kids, and so I will admit that there were a couple times I blew up at him in front of the kids. One particular time, I was yelling, and he was getting quieter, because that's what he does. He's more of a detacher, more of a withdrawer. I'm more, aggressive. He's more passive-aggressive. And so that was what was happening. And afterward, I felt very bad. I went to my youngest daughter to apologize. She was just a little girl at the time. And she looked at me and said, Daddy had a short temper. And I thought, why is she saying he had a short temper? I was the one that was yelling. And she looked at me and said, and you had a long temper. So I'm just coming clean that this is something I've had to wrestle with and struggle with. But by the grace of God, and I can remember the moment I kind of turned the corner on this, I realized I am not responsible for controlling my husband. I know it sounds stupid, but it was really a revelation for me. It was an epiphany. It was a moment of light bulb going on when I realized I could let him be awful if I thought he was being awful. I didn't have to change him. And when I realized that, I realized I could back up when we're in a situation where I'm likely to explode. I could back up, walk around the house if I have to, around the block or around the state if I have to, whatever I have to do to sort of diffuse those initial emotions, and then come back around to the situation later when I'm in a calmer state of mind. We talked a bit this morning about the external locus of control. This is a mindset that feeds anger. When I feel that everything that happens to me happens from the outside, that I have no agency and no power. Remember, I spoke about this morning. We were created for power. When we feel disempowered, our aggravation level, our frustration level, our anxiety level, our general negative emotion level is going to go up. And so that external locus of control where I'm a victim of my circumstances is going to raise our frustration level and ultimately lead to more explosions if we're inclined that way. So let me give you some techniques that will help you take charge of your own self in a powerful way. Number 1, affect labeling. What that means is naming your emotions. If you can develop that one skill, it is the bedrock of emotional regulation, to be able to name your emotions as they arise within you. And I'm going to go into a little more detail about this tomorrow, but we call it name it and tame it. They tested affect labeling against cognitive behavioral techniques and desensitization techniques typically used to treat specific phobia to spiders. And they found that affect labeling, which was simply naming the emotions as they arose, was as effective as those other standard, even gold standard treatments for arachnophobia. So learn how to say, I feel, fill in the blank. And we're going to come back to this issue, but I want to give you one more tool, and that's slow, deep breathing. When people get upset, when they get anxious, when they get frustrated, when they get angry, they typically breathe like someone in fight or flight. So it's going to be like shallow and fast. What you want to do is reverse that, and kinesthetically, you will reverse the cognitive processes that are associated with fast, shallow breathing back down to the cognitive processes and the emotional states that are associated with deep, slow breathing. When you breathe deep and slow, you're at peace and rest. So you're going to kind of trick your limbic system into believing that you're actually okay, even if you're not. All right, so I'm going to show you how to do that. You're going to breathe all the way out. Then you're going to breathe in like you're breathing through a tiny straw. You're going to breathe into the count of 6. And don't go asleep on me, Steve. I know it's hard. We had lasagna. But you're going to breathe into the count of 6, hold for 2, and then breathe out to the count of 8. Okay? Ready? Breathe all the way out first. Now breathe into the count of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold for 1, 2, and then breathe out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Actually, I'm going to change this up a little. This is a song I wrote. So breathe out all the way. Okay, now breathe in.
1, 2, breathe deep. Inhale.
Hold. Breathe out.
Release, exhale. So slow, stress, fear, let go.
Breathe in.
1, 2, breathe deep. Inhale.
Hold. Now breathe out.
Release, exhale. So
A long exhale. Try not to take an extra breath. Really slow. Keep breathing out. Breathe in.
breathe deep. Inhale.
Hold. Now breathe out.
Release, exhale. So slow, stress, fear, let go.
Okay, breathe in.
1, 2, breathe deep. Inhale.
Hold. Breathe out.
Release, exhale. So slow, stress, fear, let go.
And one more time.
1, 2, breathe deep.
Hold. Breathe out. Isn't that amazing? Okay, you're all sleeping now. Okay, but here's the thing, is that you can use that in the moment. You can use it in a waiting room at the doctor's office if you're nervous about seeing the doctor or the dentist. Sorry, dentists that are out here. Nothing, no harm intended. You can use that anywhere. Some people use that song and they kind of hear me singing it and then they keep breathing. And it's a very powerful tool. It can help you go to sleep. It can help relax your muscles. It's an amazing tool. Use it. And that will help you regulate those emotions when you're in the heat of the moment. Okay, so here's the replacement behavior for escalation. It's just simply timeout. Let me make a couple of clarifications. Either spouse can time out whenever they want to time out. It's an agreement you have with each other. But bound up in that agreement that either can time out whenever they need to is the agreement that the very spouse that timed out, are you listening, is the spouse that will reinitiate the conversation within a reasonable period of time. Do you understand why? Because otherwise it'll just feel like withdrawal or avoidance, and that person will feel abandoned. I want to finish this conversation. Will you say, look, I'm timing out because I'm feeling really anxious. I feel like I'm ready to escalate, or this isn't going in the direction I feel comfortable with, but I will set up a meeting and we can talk through it. We can continue to work this out. Does that make sense? Because you don't want to just say, time out, I'm out of here, I don't want to talk to you. You want to deal with whatever it is that's causing the distress. So that's the replacement behavior for escalation. Okay? What about invalidation? David, help me out here. By the way, the 4 divorce predictors, according to a study out of Denver University, are escalation, like we just talked about, invalidation, negative interpretation, and withdrawal, which I will be talking about in a moment. But let's talk about invalidation now. It's very difficult to define invalidation, so let me just model it for you. Things like this, a category of invalidation is ordering, be happy.
Cheer up.
Grow up.
Get over it.
You get it. Ridiculing, seriously?
Ridiculous.
You're crazy.
Poor baby.
Reasoning, no reason to feel that way.
This makes no sense.
Wait, what? Judging, you're such a crybaby.
You're overreacting.
You're too sensitive.
You're just trying to get attention.
Shoulding, you should be happy.
You shouldn't complain.
You have it so good.
Crying is for babies.
And religionizing, time heals all wounds.
There's a reason for everything.
I'll pray.
God will help you.
So very often when people hear these things, I was doing the presentation once and someone raised their hand after I shared all these things and they said, you've just taken away everything I could possibly say to someone. Like, you know. So here's the thing, is that it's not what you're saying so much as what you're skipping. You're skipping that reflective listening empathy piece we've been talking about earlier today, where you actually hear the person and you let them know you're hearing them. And very often with your spouse, it's going to be hearing them, what state they're in emotionally, what their desires are, what their physical needs are, if they're hungry, if they're tired, if they're exhausted, if they're lonely, whatever it is that's going on in their subjective experience, you want to take that in before you respond with instruction or direction or fixing. So husbands who like to fix, and this is a trait men tend to have, and it's a good trait, and I appreciate it, because sometimes women just want to wallow, to be honest with you, forever in the problem, because we connect with other human beings through sadness and through negative emotions. That's how we bond. We bonded with our babies when they cried, right? We bond with our friends when we kind of commiserate about different situations in our lives. So for women, sad and negative emotions are a bonding facilitator, and so we tend to really like to share them, but we can get to the point where we're just wallowing in the negatives, and it can be very frustrating to men who tend to be more solution-oriented, and so men tend to want to fix. Am I making sense here? I'm not making categoric statements, by the way, because there are differences, but men tend to want to fix, women tend to want to feel. And so, where was I going with this? So what you want to do, men, is you want to just make sure you're hearing your spouse before you go to the solution, because that will make them more apt to receive the solution you have for them. Anything to add? David, you're so quiet today.
No, that was really good. I was just appreciating that Violetta was like,
Why is she humming?
She was loving what you were saying there, and I was loving that she was loving it. That was great. That was really landing in our marriage.
Okay, good. All right, the next little fox is defensive.
Wait, just a second.
Yeah.
Violetta, anything you'd like to say about that? Didn't think so.
Okay, David, talk about this bird.
So this is a bird called a petrel. It's a large bird. Well, actually, the petrels tend to be smallish birds, but the giant petrel, as you might have guessed, is larger. And there's actually a better bird for your illustration that you're going to use than this one.
Because I read that this bird vomits.
No,
so
that's true. It does.
It
But there's a
vomits
better
on
one.
its enemies. Okay.
Well, it regurgitates a really yucky.
But I've heard it's so forceful that it can knock.
It's not that it's
down.
forceful. It's that
No,
it's
it's
stinky
gross?
and grotesque.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's
Jaegers is really the better bird for that.
okay. And what do they do?
Same thing, but
Same
just
thing.
better than a Jaeger.
So they basically barf in response to they barf defensively.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the thing that they have all this seafood that's in their stomach and it's all noxious and disgusting, and then
gross.
when they try to get something away from it, they just give it a little taste of that.
Oh, my goodness. So that's what you call defensiveness, guys. It's just an illustration. Dr. John Gottman, I mentioned him a moment ago, this guy that has incredible research on marriage, says that defensiveness is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's interesting because he's an observant Jew. You can't see it, but he has a yarmulke on. He's a Jew, but he calls it one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse because it's so destructive on marriages. But it's hard not to be defensive in marriage, particularly if your spouse is critical. Very often spouses will develop a defensiveness criticism cycle. The more she criticizes, for example, it's not always the woman, the more he defends himself, the less she feels heard in her criticism, so she'll up the ante and make more criticisms and intensify them, and then he, feeling more assaulted by her criticisms, will up the ante on his defensiveness, and it'll just completely go off the charts. It's very, very common, by the way, in marriages that there's either a criticism defensiveness cycle or a criticism withdrawal cycle, and typically the woman is doing the one criticizing, although not all the time. So this is a problem. We don't want to end up in this kind of cycle. Here are some of the statements we say that are classic defensiveness statements. Well, what about when you
Yes, but
back off?
you should talk.
You've got to be kidding. Now, that type of thing. So I'm going to just prescribe something for you. This is a little bit different than the EAR we were doing earlier today. It has more steps. This has been developed by a man named Daniel Goleman, who is one of the crafters of emotional intelligence. He's also very involved in cognitive behavioral therapy. But my friend Elise Harbolt and David's friend Elise Harbolt helped to make it mainstream accessible by giving it this little acronym, AEIOU. It's just a process of addressing tension points in a relationship. The first thing you do is you agree with the person. You find something to agree with in the criticism that they're delivering to you. You feel like being defensive, but before you get defensive, say fair point and agree with at least part of what they're saying.
You say, yeah, you're right, I could have handled that better.
That's right. Then you go on to empathy and inquire, empathize and inquire, like the EAR that we were just doing a minute ago. And then once you've thoroughly empathized and drawn the person out effectively, you open up. You say, can I now share my perspective? You ask them. And then finally, when they've heard you, then you say something that will help affirm and unite the relationship. So what I would like to do right now is just tackle that first step here, because we've done most of the others. Let's construct a scenario where a person agrees with something that they're tempted to feel defensive about. And I'd like to use David and Violetta.
Oh, that'll be fun. Come on, babe.
Oh.
No? Are you willing? Come on, let's do it.
We talked about it a little bit.
Come on, let's go do it, babe.
Come on.
She thinks she's not going to be good at it. She'll do fine.
There's nothing to be good at. In fact,
Jen will coach you.
I'll have David do the hard work. So think of the most unreasonable criticism you can level against him, the thing that would be the most likely. I want to make it really tough for him because I want to see him sweat it out. So given the most unreasonable, emotionally laden, and irrational criticism you've ever laid against him in your whole marriage.
Well, that'll be hard.
I have no idea. I don't know.
She's going to get stage fright. This is not her wheelhouse.
All right, I'll do it.
Okay, you level
I'll
the
do it.
criticism against
I'll level
her.
the criticism. I don't need the mic. All right.
Nice try, babe. At least you got up here and sat down.
It's all right. I understand. It's the hot seat.
Okay, bring it.
All right, let's see. I have to think of an irrational one. See, most of the criticisms I bring against you are fully rational, actually. All right, I know one.
You got one, okay.
Yeah. You know, David, I just know that this project, this Try This at Home project, David, I know you're just going to bail on me. I can feel it. I've never had a guy, you know, of your caliber that I've worked with, like, stick with something, and they always find something terribly wrong with me eventually. This is my insecurities coming out, by the way. And you know, I just know that you're not going to stick with it, and you're going to get distracted, and you have so many things going on. You have so many people that want you in their life, and you have so many people asking for you, and you have so many things pulling on you, and so many projects, so many irons in the fire. You're going to lose interest in this, and it's just going to go south, and then I'm going to be like old and decrepit and too tired to start something new. But we
That was really good.
have had this conversation.
Yeah, I was going to
We
say,
really
I've
have.
heard this before.
Yeah.
It sounds like something I've heard before. Now, what do I say to you? What do I say to you?
All you're doing is agreeing with one thing. Find something to agree
Oh,
with.
easy. I can agree with a lot of that.
You can.
I am a very high caliber person.
No.
I'm kidding. One thing you said in there that was absolutely true is that I can get so busy that I get distracted. That's true. That's a fair observation.
But you're going to bail on me. I know you're going to lose interest. And I'm going to be like, I'm going to move down the priority list till I'm the very bottom, and then the higher things on the list will take over, and I'll be left in the dust.
It is true that sometimes I find difficulty prioritizing the most important things, and things do get moved down at times. That's true.
Yeah.
I need to work on that.
Yeah, yeah. And you're just ultimately going to just, I'm going to be a casualty of that, because you're never going to develop control. You'll keep taking on new things because you have ADD, and you've admitted this to me. And people with ADD are very, very driven by novelty. And so this is going to become old and routine to you, and boring. And I'm really pressing you hard, because you've honestly proven yourself to be willing to stay the course. We've done this like 8 times. So,
Right.
Yeah, I get that. But I'm just,
And
for
we wrote
sake
a
of
book. We
illustration.
actually wrote a book.
Yeah, we actually wrote a book, and it's coming out. So,
But even then, I would
yeah.
say you're right. I do, the shiny object is the thing that tends to get the most attention for me. I like new things.
now you're actually kind of reinforcing my insecurities here.
Well, I thought I was supposed to be finding
you
something
are.
I could agree with.
You are. All right. I'm supposed
I mean,
to.
I could just say, Jen, this is not
Yeah.
true, and you know it. But that doesn't. I don't think that's what we're doing.
But that's
here.
helpful. No, it's helpful. Okay, now just keep following the steps, though.
Okay.
You see them up there?
Well, I did the agreeing thing.
Yeah.
So then I want me to empathize with
Yeah.
you. I could say, Jen, this is fair. There have been times where you have texted me, and I've been distracted doing other things, and I've not responded to your text as quickly as I should. And I'm sure that is hard for you, especially when you have something pressing.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to do better about that. And I'm sure that makes you feel like you're on the outside looking in.
Mm-hmm.
How does that make you feel?
You know, a question I would ask is,
Yeah, what's a better question?
let me ask you this. Do you want to stabilize the way I feel and help? Because this is what you've done previously, is you've
Yeah.
been like, you know, Jen, I get it, but I'm really in. You know,
Yeah.
I really
No,
want to do
I've
this.
reassured
It
you
matters.
repeatedly.
So you have. So why don't you ask me, instead of asking me that, why don't you ask me what would help you, you know, feel
that's
like I'm
good.
in it for the long haul?
So what would make you feel like I'm in it and I'm that would allay your insecurities about me leaving?
Yeah, I mean, basically you have done that. Like, I don't want to do it full time because I have other things going on too.
Right.
And so I can't do it full. It's not like I'm always fully available for it, you know. But I would just like some kind of reassurance. This is what I need from you, is that you will harness your distractedness tendency and not let yourself give up on this project, because we do have a long-term plan. And it's really important to me to reach goals that I set. I don't give up on things without a lot of emotional. It's not really so much about
Yeah.
you. You'll always be my friend no matter
Right.
what happens with this. But I don't like not reaching goals, especially when I feel like God has been involved in the
something on your
setting of
heart.
the goal. Yeah, so it would be hard for me to feel like this was going to just go south. And so I would like you to really think hard about whether you're in for the duration, for the distance, to go the distance, and then if you are, then
Cross my heart and hope to die?
no, but just your verbal reassurance is enough, because you have not been, you have not neglected to follow up. You've showed up at all the workshops and so forth, so it's so far so good, but I'm just insecure. And you're distracted, and you're, novelty driven. So
Thank you for opening up, Jen. That's really
no,
great.
no. Okay, so you did very well. So the
Okay.
open up part is you saying, now can I share my side of the story?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can I share my side of
Yeah.
the story? My side of the story is that I've told you repeatedly, I love you very much. I love this project. I love working with you. And we are going to keep doing this until we get the whole project finished, and I'm in it for the long haul. Mm-hmm. And I love it. It's fun.
Do you get aggravated when I
No.
become insecure? You're
No.
not like short fused about it or anything?
No.
Okay.
No, I think it's totally reasonable.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
And we're on the same page.
Fist bump.
Okay, great.
That was our you. That was our unite.
Yeah, we were
See
uniting.
how well that went? Isn't that a great tool? Isn't that fantastic? Any questions? So defensiveness styles: ad hominem attack when you attack the person's character; blame shifting when you are responsible but you put it on them; gaslighting when you get the person to doubt their own sanity; personalizing when you take on yourself what is really theirs; and shame spiraling. These are all just ways in which we engage in defensiveness. Here's some defensiveness beliefs. I have to be perfect.
No one should ever criticize.
Okay, it's not true that you have to be perfect to be an effective human being. And it is not true that no one should ever criticize. But very often with defensiveness, when someone comes at us with feedback, we think it's the tragedy has struck, a terrible thing has happened, because after all, I have to be perfect and no one should ever criticize, you see. So that belief needs to be altered in order for us to be able to effectively move past defensiveness. Every criticism is an assault on my character is another defensiveness belief, okay? Makes sense? The replacement behavior for defensiveness is openness, where you just are okay with hearing feedback from your partner. Learn how to say fair point. All right, just two more little foxes left. Let's talk about withdrawal. Sandy and Charles got into a real tiff, and they weren't speaking to each other. You know how that happens? Total withdrawal, silent treatment from both sides. But then Charles realized that he had to catch a plane the next morning. And so he put a Post-it note on Sandy's pillow that said, "Please wake me up at 5 a.m. Well, Charles woke up at 7 a.m. the next morning with a shock and turned to see this on his pillow. It's 5 a.m., time to wake up. So here's what happens to many couples as they live in a state of permanent withdrawal. They're so ill-equipped to talk through difficult things that they end up pulling back from each other, and they just don't even go there. And that can get, you really like that one, huh? He's having a party over there. So they live in this state of permanent withdrawal where they just, everything becomes conflicted, and so they can hardly talk about anything. This is a very sad situation. So the replacement behavior for withdrawal is repair. You need to have a good repair system. That expert, John Gottman, as you can see, I draw a lot of what I do from him, says that the difference between the masters and the disasters in marriage is a repair system. If you don't have a repair system in place, you will not be able to move through some of these difficulties that at least potentially bring you closer together. And so deal with those catastrophized beliefs where you think that conflict means that your relationship lacks quality. Conflict can actually signal that we have a pulse and that we actually do love each other and that there is something to fight for here. That can be a positive thing. So move past those catastrophized beliefs, accept that there's going to be conflict in every marriage, and then work on that repair system for which we are giving you tools this weekend. Make sense? A really good way to build sort of goodwill in your spouse is the 5 love languages. Gary Chapman is a wonderful author. I love his work, and he's the original crafter of these 5 love languages. You guys have heard of this, right? All right, so here's what happened, though, with his 5 love languages is people push them on their spouse. You need to talk in my love language. The whole purpose was that the person evaluate their spouse's love language and then talk in that language. So we are very good human beings at making things selfish and self-centered. But here are the 5 love languages as he arrived out with extensive research: words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. The more you talk in your spouse's love language, the more change you'll put in the emotional bank, the more goodwill you'll build in that relationship, and the easier repair attempts will be. If you don't have that goodwill in your relationship with your spouse, repair attempts will not be as successful. So you can have all the techniques in the world, but you need to have that goodwill flowing back and forth in the relationship. And then, of course, don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry. It's beautiful words in the context of a marriage. All right, so the last of the little foxes is misinterpreting. This is something where you take something your spouse has said and twist it, and you don't interpret it correctly. So this is a conversation between a husband and wife. He says, I love you. And go ahead, David, you read that.
I love you in blue.
So I look ugly in red.
I love your curves.
You think I'm fat.
They say gentlemen prefer blondes, but I love your long dark hair.
You thinking about blondes lately, huh? But honestly, that's how it goes sometimes. Am I right? Everybody's quiet. So you walk into a cafeteria, your friends are sitting there, they're talking animatedly, but all of a sudden they go silent when they see you walk in. You can interpret that in one of 3 ways. You can interpret it as they were gossiping about me. You can interpret it as, I don't know, they just ran out of things to say. Or you can interpret it as they were planning my birthday. You see what I'm saying? You can put your own construction. And to me, if you can just as reasonably put a positive construction on something and it's going to make you feel good, as you can reasonably put a negative construction that will make you feel bad, do the positive one. Right. Feel good whenever you can. Don't lie to yourself. But here's how it could look. The replacement behavior for misinterpretation is checking in. He says, I love you in blue. She says, are you saying I don't look good in other colors? And he says, David,
I love you in all colors. It's just that I especially like you in blue because it brings out the blue in your eyes, and I love your blue eyes.
See? A lot of what leads to misinterpretation is what's called emotional reasoning. Let me explain what emotional reasoning is. Emotional reasoning is looking at your emotions as standalone facts, as evidence for what is. So a person that engages in emotional reasoning will say, well, I feel guilty, therefore I must be guilty. I feel hopeless, there must be no hope. I feel unloved, there must be no love. And I must be unloved. So in a marriage context, I feel like my spouse doesn't care about me. It must be even so. We need to break that habit of emotional reasoning and actually check in with our spouse and find out if it's true. Do you really not love me? Give them a chance to tell you the truth. Do you really not care about me? Give them a chance to tell you if that's true or not, and then believe them.
Jen, let me just say one thing about that. The point that you made earlier about the putting the best construction on situations that you're not fully informed on is completely in harmony with what Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3.
That's
Do
right.
nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, esteem others better than yourself. And this is, of course, just a verse before the beautiful poem about the condescension of Jesus. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Mm-hmm. So when Paul is thinking and reflecting on the mind of Christ, a mind that was self-sacrificial, he includes this element of giving people the benefit of the doubt. And this is what's meant by Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 when he says that love believes all things and hopes all things. It doesn't mean it's gullible. It means that it puts the best construction on things.
So you're not going to look at clear evidence that the person has nefarious intentions toward you and just be an idiot. But on the other hand, you're going to put the very best possible construction that you can do so reasonably.
Yeah, like if you read the book of like one illustration I love is you read the book of Genesis and Abraham and Sarah, Abraham in particular, having doubts about the promised child and the promises of God and the great covenantal promise of land and descendants. But then when you come and read the description of Abraham in the New Testament in Hebrews 11, it says that he did not waver at the promise. But in fact, he had wavered. So this is not the Bible saying something that's untrue. It's under the inspiration of the Spirit, God writing Abraham's history in the most generous way.
Because he also twice basically surrendered his wife to pagan kings.
Right.
And it says he wavered not in unbelief. But what he was doing, I feel, there is taking the victory that was won on Mount Moriah with Isaac, where he was willing to obey at any cost.
I agree.
And applying that to the rest of his life.
That's right. That's exactly. So what that happens is that God sees our lives through the holy history of the success and victory of Jesus. And then he views us that way. He sees us as we can be in Christ and puts the best possible construction. I mean, think of the first words that Saul heard. He was a persecutor of the church. He was a bad dude. And the first words that he heard there in Acts 9 from Ananias were, "Brother Saul." So when we put the best construction on a situation, on a person, on their words, we are behaving in a godly way. And this is, you can practice this, not to immediately assume or reflexively assume that something is negative, but put the best possible construction on it. And I think that you wouldn't mind me saying, Violetta, in Violetta's family, there's a lot of negativity. It's probably a consequence of communism because, her father was in communism, and communism really broke the brains of a lot of the people in Romania. And when we first got married, Violetta found it really easy, not even found it easy, it was just her natural reflex to be negative about things. Right? This is true, babe, yeah? And credit to her. I mean, I'm so proud of her because she had to overcome a way of doing things and thinking about things that was probably generational. It wasn't just her father. It would have been her parents. And she has now become a very positive, very affirming person that doesn't reflexively jump to the worst possible conclusion and doesn't reflexively take a negative construction on everything. She had to learn that. And she did. She's really, really good at it now. But it just goes to show that you can train yourself to think more biblically, to think with a gospel emphasis and inflection, to put the best construction on something and not to assume the worst.
One of the things that I really love about a biblical approach to psychology and by extension human growth is secular psychology tends to look at people's trauma history, their home of origin, in such a way that confines that person to always being that way. But the Bible teaches,
if any man is in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. That's right.
People can change, and sometimes quite radically. They can become completely
just
different.
As a little side note, I was just having this conversation with Ty Gibson when we were walking on the streets of Athens recently. We had a person ask us about tattoos. And I have several tattoos. And I said, the reason that I wish I had no tattoos, and my primary complaint about tattoos is not the tattoo itself, or even the, quoting Leviticus 19:28, which I think is a stretch for modern tattoos, because these were acts of paganism. These were like pagan rituals. But the thing is that it staples you to your past.
That's right.
So when you see these kids, they, in their late teens or 20s, like I was in my 20s, you get all these tattoos, these permanent marks on you when you're 20. Well, the person that you are when you're 20, 22, 25, 26, 27 is not the person you're going to be when you're 35, 40, 45, 50, 60, and 70. But this is exactly what Satan likes to do. He likes to do anything that staples us and causes us to permanently and hyper-identify with our past. And when I said this to Ty, he was just blown away. He just that's the best explanation I've ever heard about the tattoos thing, where the gospel doesn't relate to us on the basis of the worst version of ourselves, who we were in the past, but it relates to us on the best version of ourselves and who we can become. Brother Saul.
Yeah, and if you think about it, God saying that to Abraham, he had already triumphed on Mount Moriah.
Correct.
But we aren't there yet. We haven't necessarily reached the pinnacle of faith. God knows who we're going to be, and he inhabits eternity, so he experiences who we're going to be, and he still applies that to who we were and
That's
puts
right.
the best construction on that basis.
It's beautiful.
And in a marriage, it can be quite powerful to see the very best in your spouse and to relate to them because it calls forth the best traits
Correct.
in them. Yeah, such
Beautiful.
a beautiful thing.
Like I can just speak for myself briefly. You know, my father left me. My second father, who was not really my father, but he was the first father that I remember because I never met my biological dad. He was the father biologically of my brother. He also left after like 6-7 years. Then eventually my mom married Richard Asscherick. But that was fairly, that was later in my childhood. And I had decided...
I wrote the book.
Yeah, you wrote the book. Long before I was a Christian...
I wrote his biography, like his
little memoir.
Yeah.
So long before I was a Christian, I had decided that if I ever became a father, I was going to be a really good dad. This is really important to me. And Violetta can say a lot of things to me. She can say, "Oh, that looks nice on you," or "Oh, you did a good job." All this is great. I love to hear it. But when she says, I'm going to get a little choked up saying this, but
He was a great dad.
yeah, when she tells me that, I'm getting choked up. When she tells me, "You were a great dad. I've done something," it's the skeleton key that unlocks my heart. It's just such a beautiful thing because that's what I wanted to be.
And you were. I've seen it too. Not as close up as she does, but I see it too.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
All right.
And then when she says that about me, it makes me want to continue to be the best dad I can be.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Stimulating to higher aims. All right, name the 6 little foxes, guys. Go ahead. Okay. Withdrawal. Good. We want to, an affirmation to criticism ratio in a healthy relationship is at least what? 5-to-1. We want to cultivate an internal what? Locus of control. Married couples easily fall into patterns of criticism and sex, attraction, or defensiveness. Defensiveness, that's right. I knew you'd do that, David. Many marriages end up in a state of permanent withdrawal because of a lack of a what? Repair system, that's right. Misinterpretation can come about as the result of what kind of reasoning? Emotional reasoning, thank you. All right, you guys, I think we got it for today. What a blessing to have you, and we're looking forward to tomorrow. What's for breakfast?
It's going to be awesome.
Oh, I know. It was so good today. The food was amazing.
It's
That's
be
why
incredible.
these people are kind of semi-comatose. Oh, everything. The lasagna was off the charts.